Hi, my name is Ayanda Sithebe, and I am a casting director, professional casting director. And this is my masterclass on casting for the perfect role. I'm really excited to dive into it. I think casting is one of the most neglected sort of professions or disciplines in the filmmaking sector, and it's a passion of mine. And most casting directors like me start as actors, so we develop empathy for actors when they come to auditions and stuff like that. So I started my career as an actor as well, and then grew into just passion of admiring the craft of acting and just like the work that actors put in. And then I found myself casting for a number of beautiful productions in South Africa and internationally as well. So how I really want us to start this class is that my ethos is that I believe that creativity is intelligence having fun. So it's important when you're doing what you love doing is like have fun. So I hope this masterclass really can really be fun as we dive into what is really casting or what that process sort of unfolds. But before I dive into what is casting, I really want to take it back a bit. I am going to make references of Reyka season 2, which I've cast for. I'm going to make reference on The Wife, which I cast for as well, which is on Showmax. I'm also going to make reference of 1802, which is on Mzansi Magic. So before we really break down what casting is and what that process entails, I think it's very important for us to look at what is acting. Because most of the times, like we are just surrounded by actors, right? And most of the time, we as crew or casting directors or directors don't really understand what actors go through or what actors are really doing. Even sometimes actors themselves don't take the time and define what is it that they're really doing. They just go with the passion of it, or this just feels right, or is it's instincts. So let's define what is acting or how I define acting. So this is how I define acting. I define acting as acting is the ability to reflect the truth at your highest imaginary state. So meaning that acting is all about reflection. It's all about recreating, re-mirror sort of life back to the society themselves. So as actors, most of the time we're encouraged to work on our instruments, which are it's the body and the mind and sometimes the spirit, right? So that goes without saying. You have to work on those things, but with the understanding of the definition that I just gave you, is that when you understand ability, is that now we are talking about the know-how. Do you have the capacity to carry these stories? Do you have the capacity to carry these characters? Do you have the skills? Do you have the techniques? So this is where you spend some time on, do I have this ability? And how do I work on really refining this ability? Then you look at reflection. And on reflection or reflect is when we talk about sharpening your tools or your powers of awareness. Half the time, actors are not aware of their environment. And that same environment is the environment that you are responsible to reflect. So when we spend some time in terms of how do I mirror life back to itself and in the most truthful way that I can, and this is where truth comes in. And sometimes we can negotiate truth. My truth might not be your truth. So sometimes I say it's the ability to reflect life, to project life back to itself. And so when we look at those three aspects of acting, I think we get to really, really understand what is acting. And we get to appreciate what we need to do in efforts to make sure that we remain truthful to that skill. But also you start respecting actors, with the work that they put in terms of making sure that when you watch them on screen, you are reflected. Everything you're doing is almost like, oh man, I can identify with that. I know a person like that. So that's very, 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 very important. So that's acting. Now let's get into what is casting, right? Something that we don't even find in some of the colleges. I think who teaches about casting? No one, literally. So even if when you want to be a casting director, you almost have to just figure it out yourself or find another fellow casting director that can have time to sort of mentor you. And most of the time, we rush to understanding what's happening in the room and not the actual process and how that value chain sort of works when it comes to casting. So I like defining things. So I'd like to define casting as well. So how I define casting is that casting is an introduction of an actor to a character. And you hope that when those two come together, that character can come to life. Or sometimes we call it a curation of an ensemble, a curation of great players that can bring a story to life. So essentially, that's what is casting, and that's how I define casting. And today I'd like to talk about almost the 4 phases of casting. And obviously, this is my process as a casting director in the office. This is the process we use. And also, it's important to understand there are different types of casting directors as well. Um, I'm an independent casting director. What that means is that I can cast for any network, I can work for anyone, I can do different productions, I can do a short film, I can do a feature, I can do a telenovela. So I'm an independent casting director. And then there are in-house casting directors. Now, in-house casting directors are usually working for a specific production company, and they just cast the work that's done within that production company. And then there are TVC casting directors who just specialize on commercials. And sometimes an independent casting director can double and do some TVCs and so forth. So I just specialize on long form content. So those are the types of casting directors. But let's talk about phase 1. So how the whole process starts, and how this process starts is that I get a brief from a production company, and maybe this production company has been commissioned to do a telenovela or a drama series, a 13 part, or they commissioned to do a film. They'll come to me and say, "Hey, Ayanda, we've got this beautiful show and would like you to find the actors for the show." So that's the first step. And then I'll almost negotiate my rate with them. And then we sign up, and then I'm doing the show. And the first things that I'll do is obviously read the material. I think it's very important. When we have the time to read the material, I'll read the material and get the sense of what these characters are and what the story is, because it is important for you to be aware that story is king. Every time we come together to tell a story, that story is king, and we're serving that narrative. So egos aside half of the time. Once that's done, signed, I read the material, and then my step 2 would be doing a casting production plan, meaning I look at when is the TX. So when is this thing going live on TV, and then I work backwards. The achievement here is to make sure that by the time they go on pre-production, they already have the actors, they've got the cast. So I'll do a production plan to make sure that we work with those timelines. And then once I've done the production plan, I'll do a breakdown. Now, what is a breakdown? Now, breakdown is now me taking the information from the script, the Bible in terms of who these characters are, and the sides in terms of the sides that I'm going to use to audition. We then brief it out. Now, what this means, brief it out to agencies, different agencies, and that's why it's important that you get your briefs from your agencies. A lot of people get scammed with open calls and stuff like that. So if you see an open call, just make sure that you do your research in terms of that's the right production that's doing that open call. But usually we work with agencies, so we brief out to the agencies and say, "Hey, we are looking for these characters. Who in your books, in your roster, you think they are perfect for these roles?" Then they'll send what they call the suggestions. So they'll say, "I'm suggesting these people for my roster." And then we as a team, we then go through all these suggestions. We might also have ideas in terms of who's perfect for the role. Production might have ideas, the director might have ideas, but we rely on this pool of suggestions from different agencies. We then select who is close to the role. We look at the picture in terms of how the role is described. We then also look at your CV. So it's important to keep your CV very updated in terms of what have you done? Do you have enough experience to almost carry this role? But sometimes we do take the risk of using someone without experience, but with the skills and the talent, of course. Then after that process, then we book you. And just to go back a bit, it's important your headshots, because that's the first time me as a casting director I meet you, is when that headshot sit on my table. So I always say put some energy around your not self tapes, around your headshots. Invest in good headshots as well. Also, don't catfish us. So it's very important for you to make sure that those headshots, they represent the true self. So when you walk in that room, I can almost match the two, the headshot and yourself. So essentially, that's phase one of the casting process. Then phase two, it's the actual live auditions, which I break them into like four. So the first session would be the leads. So this is when I just focus on the top four or top five of the characters. So these leads, we see them first, and then we'll probably see support cast next. Then we do what we call the initial audition. And then after the initial audition, we then have callbacks. Then callbacks, we have director sessions or callbacks. Sometimes you're going to work with the casting director or with the actual director. Then the last step would be chemistry test, which is almost like, for me, the phase three of it. This is where you almost see if there's husband and wife, would these two work together? Because you might have two amazing actors, but when you put them on screen, there's no chemistry. So we do what we call the chemistry test, which I enjoy and I have fun with the chemistry test. Also, it's important to know that there are things that you cannot do on a chemistry test. If any casting director asks you to start kissing on a chemistry test, that's very wrong, because that's in an absence of an intimacy coach. So it's very important to know how to work that room in terms of what to do and what not to do. No one is allowed to ask you to take off your t-shirt and so please be aware of those things. So that's your chemistry test. And then phase four, which now is becoming very, very I don't want to say popular, but very important to do, is what we start doing is like talent reputation. So now we start looking at your reputation, whether it's online, whether you say all the wrong things online. So we look at those things now. It's very important. We're not looking at numbers, but we're just looking at how you carry yourself, because once we cast you, you're now going to represent that production company. You're going to represent that channel that you are working for. So it's important to make sure that you keep a very clean brand. Then we also look at availability, of course, which is very important. Sometimes you cast someone and then last minute they say, no, I'm on this show and so forth. So that's like the phase four. Cool. So that's the process. And I can go on, right? So that's the process. But now let's go into working the room. Now this is you now as an actor auditioning. How do you work the room, right? And most of the time, I've seen a lot of actors where they put their focus on how am I going to impress this casting director, which most of the time I think it's a wrong approach, where the focus should be, how do I move this room with my work, with my art? And that's, for me, that's very, very important, is that when you invest yourself in the work, that comes through. A perfect example with this is when we did Reyka. Limo Hang Tsipa, who is now King Shaka. When we're doing Reyka, he came into audition for a different role, actually, not the lead role that he played on Reyka, which is the serial killer. He came in for a different role. But it's the work that he put in that role that we started seeing other things that could translate for the other role. So going into the room, it's not about, I'm going to do this move and I'm going to move them, but it's almost like make the right choices that serve the story, that serve the character that you are auditioning for. Another example about really working the room that I like making is, don't let the room sort of work you. So don't go into the room and be overwhelmed by the crew or whoever is there. It's like, how do you work the room? And most actors tend to come into the room and their insecurities sort of start coming out and so forth. So one of the examples I make is this. When you're walking on the road and you see a piece, not a piece, you see a can of something, you neglect it unless you're into recycling. But if you're just a normal person, you just neglect it, right? But if I take the same can that's crashed and I put it in a gallery, right? That starts changing, right? How you look at it. You look at it now from looking at it as a piece of rubbish, you start looking at it as a piece of art. And that's how I see actors when they walk into the room. It's like they're a piece of art. We don't look at the insecurities and what you think is wrong with you or what you think is right with you. So when you walk into that room, remember, you are the piece of art, but don't let the ego go up as well, right? But you're the piece of art. So that allows you to work the room. It allows you to, for us to just focus on the artist that you are and not other things. But you have to have that sort of consciousness that I'm working this room and this room is not working me. Um, so let's talk about from room to screen. Most actors is I encourage actors to prep. So it's prep, 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 and more prep. So fail to prepare and prepare to fall or fail, right? So if you don't prep, you are really in trouble. So once actors know that I'm an actor, you must then create a system for yourself. So I would say create a system for yourself that allows you to say, when I get a brief, this is what I do. When I get a booking, this is what I do. Because then that system sort of becomes a guiding sort of line for you. You don't just like, oh, I've received a brief, life goes on. But you can sit and say, okay, I've got a brief, and this is the system that I'm going to follow. Two, we tend to glance over breakdowns, Bibles, or sites. You're like, oh, okay. Or you're just rushing to know the lines and not give yourself time to really understand who is this character. And I always say as well, there's so many information on the sites that just tells you about the characters. So it's important for you to almost read those breakdowns with understanding. Don't rush to know the lines. Just read with understanding, know the scripts, know what this character is through the character Bible that we always share. And then also break a sweat. Like actors tend to just like, okay, I'm going to do it tomorrow. I'm going to do it tomorrow. And then by last minute, that's the only time you're trying to prepare. Like break a sweat, like put in the hours in terms of, I'm going to really master this character and I'm going in there to display how much I've done the work in the character. Then do your research as well. It's very important to do your research. Sometimes I get actors who come into the room and they don't even know whether they're doing a sitcom or they're doing a telenovela or they're doing a short film. And that's very important because that informs your approach as well and some of the choices that you make. Because if you're doing a telenovela and you understand that genre and you understand that it's big, it's loud and so forth, you then sort of make choices that informs the genre that you're auditioning for. So it's very important to do your research. Also, I encourage actors to print their sides, and maybe I'm old school, but print your sides, map them out, make notes in terms of how you're going to make those choices, and then save those sides as well, because also that's another way of documenting your journey as an actor. And then lastly, plan your journey of auditioning. Like, don't just like, okay, tomorrow I'm auditioning, that's it. Plan that journey. I'm going to wake up this time. This is going to be my breakfast. I'm going to dress up like this, put the clothes out there and get there an hour early as well. Sometimes it helps. Walk around, just plan the journey so that nothing sort of interferes with the journey. And the people around you start respecting that as well. Say, oh, when I enter an audition, don't touch. And that's his whole day dedicated to that audition. Then also leave room for different perspectives. So I know I'm encouraging you to prep and do much work as you can, but just leave room for a different perspective. Because sometimes you come into the room and you think you've made the right choice, but we've spent so much time with the story, with those characters, we sort of know better. So sometimes when you say, okay, these choices are not working, are you able to try this? You should be able to adapt to that as well. Sometimes actors, once they've made a decision or a choice, it's hard to take them out. So always leave room for a different perspective. Then I always say there are 3 auditions that sort of happen, and you should sort of avoid the last audition. In one audition, there are 3 auditions. So there's an audition that you are prepping. You are in the mirror it's the best performance, it's Oscar winning, and right? And then there's an audition that's actually happening with you and the casting director. And sometimes that audition lacks a lot of the things that you did the night before. So I'm always encouraging actors, like whatever prep work that you did, bring it into the audition so that you leave everything in that room, right? Because the third audition is the worst. Trust me, I've been there. Now, the third audition is the audition that after you've left the room, you're like, oh shit, could have, should have. I didn't make that choice. That's the worst audition that you must try and avoid so that you leave everything in that room. And if they call you, you leave it to the universe. And then always ask your ego to sit down. And like naturally, actors, I think ego is our thing. We just have it. But I think it's important to have that conversation with yourself, to continuously ask your ego to sit down, because that allows or opens you up to sort of work with the casting director, and it creates a beautiful environment as well. And then energy, it's important to have the right energy in the room. It's a good balance. Sometimes people are so low that you're just working too hard to pick them up, which is never ideal, because then I think I'm already thinking you on set, are you going to come with this mood or this energy? And then there are actors who come so high that they leave you exhausted. You're like, oh my God, that was like so much energy. So it's important to find that just right balance of energy as an actor. And then also journal, man, document this journey, document this process, because sometimes we do so much good work as creatives and you find ourselves in a point where you're like, oh my God, I'm not working. But sometimes when you look at your journal, when you look at the documents that you sort of create along your journey, it almost sort of gives you uh, a good comfort that actually I am putting the work and this is how the work looks like. So I don't think there's ever a perfect role, but it's the work that we put in to just bring these characters to life or honor these characters and the story. I really, really hope that really helps you in your journey. And I also hope that it helps upcoming casting directors as well to have sight in terms of how this process works. That's me. My name is Ayanda Sithebe, and that was my masterclass on casting. I think it's very important that if you can do better, because going halfway sort of leaves us with a lot of regrets as artists, as creatives. Wishing you all the best.